The Carpenter and the Cradle, A History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Worden, read by the author. Chapter 31. Although the mountain air was cold, no one had any problem falling asleep that night. But June woke with the earliest light at 4 in the morning. She could hear movement outside her tent. Was it the light that had awakened her, or was it the slight swish-swish of a moving body? Was it animal or human? There were no snuffling noises like an animal would almost certainly make. It didn't sound animal. With her heart racing, she pulled up the zipper of the door of the tent ever so slightly and put one eye to the opening, but she couldn't see anything. Then a pair of boots came into sight. Her heart rate returned to normal. They were her dad's boots. She finished unzipping the tent door and crept out in her pajamas, doing her best not to wake July, Coral, and Maylie. Gussie had slept in her parents' tent, and Coral's brothers had another tent together. The 4 girls had crammed into the largest tent, but it had been crowded, even though it bore the claim of being a 4-person tent. "Hey, Dad," June whispered, shivering in her thin pajamas. "What are you doing up so early?" "I could ask you the same thing," he answered her in a low voice. "You're going to freeze. Here, I have an extra jacket. Throw this on." June gratefully took the jacket from him and shrugged it on, plopping down onto the mass of rock beside her dad, pulling the jacket as low as it would go to avoid sitting on the cold, bare rock face, and hugging her knees so that they were tucked into the oversized jacket along with the rest of her. "I don't know what I'm doing up so early. Just couldn't sleep any later, I guess. I don't know if it was that I heard you walking around or that the light woke me up, or maybe nerves, excitement, something like that." "Same goes for me," her dad said. "I thought I heard something too, so I came out to investigate, but either I was imagining things or it had moved on by the time I got out of the tent. Hope I didn't wake anyone else." "Everyone else in my tent is still asleep. I don't see any other signs of life from any of the other tents." June's glance wandered over to the tent where Coral's brothers were presumably fast asleep. "Good, let's hope everyone sleeps as long as they can and is well rested for today's venture. Although, not so late that we get a late start. It'll be a heavy hike today." "What's the plan for today again?" June asked, absent-mindedly reaching from her perch to pluck a mini arrangement of the various kinds of alpine wildflowers the meadow abounded with. "I thought we'd climb right up Victoria's Peak, then down into the valley between that peak and the next one, Snowdon, and have our lunch by the creek. From the nurse's description, I think the spot on the map that was marked sounded like the start of Troisy Creek. It starts as a spring in that valley. Then, after lunch, we'll have a bit of an explore, see what there is to see, then back up Victoria and down again to our base camp here in time for supper, if all goes well. Such is my plan, anyway." "That sounds like a lot of climbing," June groaned, rubbing her calves that reminded her every time she moved that they weren't used to the task that had been asked of them yesterday. "Unfortunately, it will be, but you're young and healthy. You'll be fine. How do you think I feel?" Her dad faked an old voice, hunching his back and tightening his lips to approximate a toothless grin. "I'm younger, but not as used to being as active as you are. You're always doing this kind of thing." "I haven't hiked this route in years," Paul corrected. "Yeah, but you do lots of other climbs." "It's good for you. Make a man out of you." June laughed and got up, stretching. She pulled off the coat, handed it back to her dad, and headed for her tent. "Just what I don't want to be," she called over her shoulder. "If you wanted a man-child, you should have had one." July was stirring when June pulled up the zipper on the tent to let herself in. Coral and Maylie, to all appearances, were dead to the world still. July rolled over and glared at June out of one bleary eye. "Why are you up so early? It's barely daylight." "I don't know. It's hard to sleep in when you're sleeping outside, and Dad was roaming around, so I went out for a talk with him till it got too cold. I guess he couldn't sleep either. He thought maybe he'd heard something moving around, too, before it was light enough to really see anything." July's eyes popped open. What did he think he heard? He didn't say, just a noise, something moving. "A bear?" "I don't think so. Probably nothing that big and noisy, or he would have been more concerned." "Huh." July's eyes closed again. If it wasn't a bear, it wasn't more interesting than sleep, her attitude seemed to be. June crawled back into her sleeping bag, but there was no more sleep to be had on her part. When she heard signs of life from outside the tent, she quickly pulled yesterday's clothes from her pack and changed awkwardly out of her pajamas while mostly lying down. Ready or not, there was a long day's hike to be faced. Breakfast had never tasted better. Everyone was ravenous for the pancakes cooked over the open fire that Paul soon had sizzling in the pan. The dry mix only needed water added, and was a lightweight way to carry breakfast up the mountain. After breakfast, Coral and Mei-Li volunteered to wash the tin plates and fill canteens from the mountain spring running on the other side of the meadow. They came back with their day's water supply and some excitement. "It looks to us like somebody's been here ahead of us recently," Mei-Li told the group assembled around the campfire. "Yeah, there's a spot on the bank of the stream, a place where there's a mossy rock that's a good spot for reaching into the creek to get water where it's running fast and clear. And the moss looks disturbed. There's a big chunk missing and marks like someone missed their footing and slid into the creek. Then we looked around a little more and saw some shoe prints in the mud a few feet from the rock. That's maybe where he climbed out of the creek. They must have been made since the last rain." "Well, it hasn't rained in 2 weeks, July shrugged. "They could be weeks-old tracks. People do hike this trail occasionally." "I don't think those tracks could have lasted that long without the mud kind of slooping them in," Coral disagreed. "Oh well, we haven't seen anyone. Where would they be if they were still here? Maybe it was recent, but not that recent," April guessed. "Anyway, we'll keep our eyes open," Paul said. "But if we're going to make it up and down Victoria's Peak twice today, we'd better get a move on.